On this week's show, we'll take a look at why everything is a subscription and you don't really own anything anymore. Software as a service started as a good idea, and there's still plenty of good in a SaaS model, but there's also a pretty bad side to it these days, and we'll talk about that. I wanted to get into this because I've noticed a trend over the past few years of a certain segment of people on social media complaining how you don't own things anymore. You don't own software, you don't own movies or music or books, and I wanted to dig into the origins of that and how this road to hell was paved with good intentions. And I do think it is... right? Like, it is a thing. Why don't I own things anymore? Why is everything a subscription? Like, it is the modern state of existing is a perpetual lease. Like, you don't, right? Like, there's so much that you no longer own and is subject to the whim of, well, that license agreement expired, so that book or that movie or that music doesn't exist in your library anymore. And it's like, well, okay, but I paid you money to own it. And it's like, well, no, you didn't read the EULA. Actually, you paid money to rent the rights to temporarily have access to it. And it's like, you guys changed that on people without anyone actually realizing that that's what was happening to them.
Yeah, I think I don't have a problem with it, actually. I think when I think about the technical, and I don't know what the percentage this impacts their decision. But as we become more technical, have we become more technical to the point where it became expensive for the vendors to put software on our machines? Like, there's so much customization.
Yeah, there's a part of it.
Right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. That's
well, I think
definitely
that's
an
what
impact.
we'll get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into, like, there are a ton of benefits to it, but also music streaming is just a way to put money in the billionaires' pockets, and it screws you and it screws the music artists. Like, there's a bunch of cases where it's actually bad now, but we'll dig into all of that. So I wanted to start with definitions just to make sure we're using terms consistently and in a way that people have probably heard of. So software as a service, SaaS, that is something like a Salesforce or an Atlassian cloud where you use Jira or Confluence. That is basically the entire software package is a thing that you log into and use, but it's just the software itself is hosted somewhere else and fully rendered, which is different than something platform as a service, PaaS, PaaS, which is something like, I don't know how many people are going to know what Mongo Atlas is, but it's a component like a database or a web server or something like that that is hosted by somebody else and used by software developers to deliver software, but they're providing basically the platform to those engineers, which is creating this like hierarchy of dependencies. If you've ever been screwed because one of your pieces of software was down, not because the company that offered you the software was down, but because Microsoft or Google or someone else was having issues, this chain of dependencies does start to show up as you have a SaaS layer, a PaaS layer, and then infrastructure as a service, IaaS, which is things like cloud providers, Amazon, AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, all of these things that are providing just the fundamental foundational components of software platforms themselves. And then I think you added in Edge, right?
Yeah, Edge is an interesting one because it sometimes can be very difficult to tell the difference between Edge and just cloud tech, right? But Edge is really a geographical and a processing challenge, the super low latency. So we can get more into Edge in a little while, but it is one of the bigger growing markets right now. So it's interesting to talk about.
But the goal is basically you as a company no longer need to have 5 servers in a closet somewhere in your corporate headquarters running a bunch of software. And that scales up to you needed to put servers in a data center somewhere with fiber internet connections and a bunch of things to handle your business. Like any number of things that used to be owned and operated by companies, or you as a software user used to have Office installed on your desktop, right? Like a bunch of things are different when you have these different service options.
Yeah, and if you think about Edge, and it's often easier to think about like supermarkets, 7-Elevens, gas stations, data that they're acquiring on premise. We don't want that to travel across the country to our data center. Now, the cloud changes things up a little bit, as we'll find out as we're talking more, but Edge means you can do that processing much more geographically deliberate locations, right? And that processing power. So yeah, you can make decisions in the Edge instead of...
We'll get into this.
Yeah.
Edge just feels like we've gone back to client server. You've just basically now reinstalled hardware and processing power in the 711, which was no different than when you had the client server with the, I don't know, like at some point you like Edge. I get why it makes sense because it can talk to all the cloud-based services, but edge computing feels like a step backwards because actually it was bad to wait the 500 milliseconds to have the data flow over the internet over to the data center in Chicago. It was good actually to have the hardware, and now it's a more efficient version of the hardware, but we're back to basically computers in a closet, which is
Yeah,
weird.
but the Edge wouldn't exist in 7-Eleven. They have a lot of the equipment already. We can get more into it in the conversation, but
Sure.
they have a lot of the equipment already. There are new devices going in there as technology changes, which would be outside of the Edge anyway. But the cloud, the interesting thing about it is how easy it was for the cloud vendors to just start building on the Edge, right? So you have a lot of very deliberate Edge vendors. And now AWS, Azure, Google starting to get into edge technology as well, or have been for a few years because it's so easy for them to do. They used to be regionalized
Sure.
availability zones, but yeah, we'll get into that.
So this road to hell, how was it paved? What was the history? Why did we end up here? So if we go back to 1990s and earlier and talk about like how computers originally started off, it was those expensive in the office client server and sometimes data centers with a ton of human support. You had entire teams of IT people responsible for the hardware and the software configuration. And it depends how far back you want to go, but like on the mainframe, you had things like time sharing where you had to be able to say, okay, I'm allowed to go do my spreadsheet work from 2 p.m. to 2:30 because I'm the one who's allowed to use the mainframe's compute power now. And at some point they realized they could do that in sub-second trade-offs. And so the mainframe was actually evolving to say, okay, from 201.5 to 201.9, I'm handling Sally's spreadsheets. And then from 201.9 to 202.3, I'm handling Mark's whatever. And so like a bunch of this technology slowly evolved as they tried to figure out how to deal with compute capacity in what started off as like, you know, giant tape and punch cards and slowly evolved from the whatever 40s up to the 90s. By 1996, obviously AOL and the internet was starting to become an actual thing. In 1996, Netscape released Secure Socket Layers 3.0, which basically allowed online transactions to be secure. And so at this point, up until 1996, you were taking your life into your own hands, putting your credit card into a web form somewhere. And Netscape basically released the little lock icon. How can you know that this is secure for your transactions? It's fully encrypted. And so that was one of the first things that you needed to be able to do any of this kind of stuff. How do you pay Spotify a monthly fee? Credit card processing. So you want that stuff to be encrypted. So took quite a while for them to figure out how to get to that point. From 98 to 2001, you had the dot-com bubble. I think this was probably one of the first examples of a bunch of people who were like, hey, you can come to a website and we'll do stuff for you on your behalf. And that really wasn't the way it worked up until then. You had to go to, Office Depot or Best Buy or whatever and buy a CD and install the software on your desktop versus the dot-com bubble was like, no, just do it all through the browser. And there was a ton of e-commerce and functionality trying to move purchasing and a bunch of things into the dot-com. Now, any number of things caused the dot-com bubble to burst. One, the technology wasn't really quite there in a lot of cases. And two, people didn't charge for it for some reason. And so the business models all sucked and the dot-com bubble burst because a bunch of people's valuations were too high based on not making any revenue.
That's the period where technologists thought we needed to know 3-4 different technologies or languages, and that was going to be enough for the rest of our careers. So we had
you needed
client-side
HTML,
scripting,
JavaScript, like,
style sheets.
You were good.
And that was it. You were good. And it's just not like that anymore.
No, not so much. By the late 90s, you had the start of a phrase called ASPs, application service providers, which was basically just a different form of time sharing. Rather than having a mainframe in your office and you figuring out how the local network would go and share resources, you had application service providers providing infrastructure that they were hosting on your behalf. And a lot of the times this was in spaces like email and file processing and things like that. But the late 90s was sort of the emergence of this idea that I could outsource to another company that I wanted to have them do some of my things. The pinnacle of that really was in 1999, Salesforce. So Salesforce, the CRM system, basically started to say, hey, why are you doing all of this in desktop software, in file server, client server situations? We can offer it to you through the browser, and was really one of the first examples of software as a service, a fully capable suite of tools that fully replaced a piece of desktop software and sort of launched this idea that you could do software as a service.
And actually, in the last few days, they've acquired Informatica. So they've actually had a good 26-year run. I think that deal's worth like $8 billion. So
Yeah,
Informatica,
Salesforce really is like unlike a lot of things, right? Like Friendster versus MySpace versus Facebook. Like Salesforce somehow was the first and is still around. That is kind of impressive.
well, it's impressive, but it's also why we call it sales fast, right? A bunch of business guys are allowed to do technical things. And so it's spaghetti. And then quite often you acquire a company that has their own sales force. So your migration is several years. So there's a stickiness to it that's not always positive. But yeah, for the most part, they've grown
Agreed.
a successful business.
Yes. By the year 2000, Windows had automatic updates and Mac OS X had their software update feature. And so now you didn't need to actually go to the store, buy the upgrade DVD, buy the, security pack patch. All of these tools were recognizing a lot more people are connected to the internet. Let's just download things like security updates and things like that. So the internet basically is allowing a bunch of these capabilities to start to say, yes, you paid your whatever, $200 to install OS X, but now we're going to give you the updates and the security patches directly over the internet, and started to break down that barrier between what was installed software and what could be updated for you online. My favorite of this list is Microsoft Hailstorm. So in 2001, Microsoft had MSN and Hotmail, and a bunch of functionality, and they basically rolled out this concept called Hailstorm, which is a terrible name because it just sounds menacing. But the idea was a very Web 2.0, API driven, all of these things are services. Your contact list, your email, your calendar, everything is an API, and you could build a bunch of apps on top of it. And so if you wanted to build your own CRM, if you wanted to build your own calendar plugin and do things to better manage the people that you were interacting with, the idea was basically Microsoft trying to say, we will be the foundational technology that you build on top of, using all of our MSN and Hotmail capabilities. And everyone freaked out. No one liked this idea. Everyone thought it was a terrible idea to give this monopoly. Microsoft's right in the middle of their antitrust suit. And so the idea that you were going to give Microsoft all of your contact information, all of your personal calendar details and information, and be able to go and rely on them to provide this foundational platform as a service was laughable, and they killed the project. They ended up not doing any of that. And it is wild to think that Microsoft rightly was criticized for being a monopoly. We then basically in 3 years turned around and gave all of that to Google.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that timing was wrong, right? But
right.
This is when I always feel like the what does Norton call them in the Glass Onion movie? Like disruptors. Like Microsoft disrupted, and they paid the penalty, but they got people thinking. And then Google came along a few years later, and were like, everybody did it, and it's like, so yeah, Microsoft were disruptors and should be given some credit for where we are today. Because I mean, it's only been good since Google did that, right?
Yeah, no, our privacy and our data security is great ever since. But no, genuinely, it is one of those weird things where Microsoft is rightly derided for plenty of terrible things that they have done to the industry and software. And I'm not going to be defending Microsoft necessarily, but a ton of things that you take for granted on the web are because Microsoft was trying to effectively break the law and do some of those things. If you've ever typed into a blog and bolded the text and done any kind of formatting, you're using a non-standard feature that Internet Explorer 5 introduced and everyone hated at the time. But at some point, content editable just became the only way that you do web editing now. And Firefox and Netscape and Chrome and everybody adopted Microsoft's non-standard standard. And you can thank them for that. The concept of Web 2.0 interconnected APIs is Microsoft Hailstorm. So yes, they don't deserve credit for a bunch of things, but they were in a lot of ways ahead of their time.
It's a lot like England, really. You know, you think about what we contributed to the world, but people only remember the bad stuff, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
cricket, rugby, football, education, healthcare, medicine,
No, we're you
electricity,
guys aren't getting credit for any of that.
gravity.
Yeah, all using an Arabic numbering system.
We would have got around to it eventually.
You would have got around to it, sure. So by 2002, Amazon's merchant.com eventually inspired the launch of Amazon Web Services, AWS. And I think it's really interesting of the gradual evolution. Like, a lot of people give Jeff Bezos the credit. I think this is your comment down below of like, Jeff Bezos figured out that Amazon was providing a bunch of good infrastructure and turned it in. And it's like, no, that was an accident. They acquired merchant.com. They realized they'd done a bunch of stuff and then stumbled into the idea of AWS and cloud computing.
Yeah, and it was a bunch of techies and product management experts. So it's pretty much like you and I, right? We could be the
There
next.
you go.
We could be the next Amazon.
Hopefully less evil. Yeah.
I love all these companies. I love all these companies. I
Yeah,
do.
you've got the empire behind you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. We just couldn't be any more different on this, right?
Uh-huh. Pretty much. By 2004, Gmail had entered its initial beta. And like we said, like Gmail is, and everything that Google started to do after Gmail is a way to get you locked into their search algorithm and did some interesting, innovative email stuff at the beginning. But I don't think anyone could argue that Google Calendar is any better than anything else out there. It was the start of Google's takeover of your personal data and moving everybody into this ad-supported free model. And yes, Hotmail is free and ad-supported. It's not the first ad-supported thing. TV and radio were ad-supported, right? So the concept is not giving Google credit for that. But Gmail is the first example of they were willing to have it lose money because it meant you sticking in their ecosystem and using their money maker, which was search. And then they could, make money off of it. But software as a service really starts to take off around this time as a company like Google says, yes, come to us for your software needs like email, calendar, and all of that. In 2005, the CTO of Microsoft, Ray Ozzie, releases a very famous memo called the Internet Services Disruption. It's the first time that one of the big sort of legacy companies like Microsoft or IBM outlines the future of the internet and subscription-based, advertising-based, being able to offer solutions through the browser, through the web, and really tries to set Microsoft on a better path and direction. In 2008, Google App Engine, which eventually becomes Google Cloud Platform, GCP, is rolled out. Again, another, example of Google sort of noticing the trend in the industry and piggybacking on it and creating their own ability to do something like AWS was doing. By 2013, Microsoft Office and Adobe Photoshop and all of the Adobe suite had moved to subscriptions. We'll talk more about this. It's a really good example of everybody hates the idea that you now rent Office or Photoshop. Photoshop is like the online poster boy for it sucks that I don't own my software anymore. And we'll get into all of those people are wrong. It's cheaper actually to do this, but it was a fairly sizable shift. You used to buy a CD of Office and like slowly they figured out how to add activation keys and stuff, but it used to be a lot more ownership driven, even though it really wasn't. We'll talk about all of that.
I had Adobe Photoshop and I never paid for it once for 10 years.
This is the other thing is a bunch of people are like,
yeah.
Right. The number of people who are like, oh, I had Photoshop and I never had to pay for the upgrade. I just got to keep using Photoshop 6. It's like, dude, you fucking downloaded Photoshop 6 off of Kazaa. Like, you didn't ever pay for Photoshop. You were never one of Adobe's customers. Calm down.
Yeah. But I feel like we screwed it for everybody else and then we just stopped using Photoshop. Now we all use GIMP. So there you go.
Exactly. So by 2023, they did a survey and found 83% of companies that responded were entirely dependent on SaaS software, didn't own any of their own software. It's a $31 billion market in 2015. It's now $146 billion by 2022. This is the direction the industry is going. You don't own things anymore. The Fed Reserve's chart of software revenue shows in 2013, it starts to increase. more drastically as things convert to subscriptions, which lines up with when Office and Photoshop changed. What was a $103 billion market in 2002 is a $453 billion market by 2022. So 4x growth in 20 years, which is pretty insane. And I think this goes to just like as this history moves on, I think the interesting thing to look at is you never actually owned your software in all of this, even when you were licensing Office on your desktop. No one ever read the end user license agreement, the EULA. That software was never actually yours. You didn't purchase it. You purchased a license to use it. And so technically this change hasn't actually changed anything. It's just, I don't think anyone ever really understood that.
And actually, this was where Microsoft excelled, right? This was Bill Gates, because everybody believed the money was in the machines, right? So when they were working with IBM, I believe, and they proposed the licensing of the OS, I think IBM were like, "Yeah, great, that's fine. The money's in the hardware." When actually today,
Right.
it's completely
Yeah.
the opposite.
Yeah, no, I think just no one understands. You never owned Microsoft Office. You never owned Photoshop. You owned the rights to have it installed on your machine. And the side effect was without the internet, there was no way for the company to figure out you've been using this software for 10 years. You've, never paid for it originally. You downloaded the exe file somewhere. And we'll talk about why, like, at some point, if you want this software to get better, if you want the bug fixes, if you want the security patches, if you want the next improvements to it because you hate that one feature works that way, you need to pay somebody to do that work for you. I'm sorry, like all of the freeloaders who wanted Photoshop to exist for forever, you were stuck with the bugs that you had as of 2002. And maybe you were okay with that, but a lot of people weren't, and a lot of people wanted the upgrades, and you need to pay people for their work. So I don't know. We'll get into like I am anti-capitalist in a lot of ways, but while we live in a capitalist system, the people who do the work deserve to be compensated for the work. And so, yes, you should pay Microsoft money. Sorry. Like, I don't know. There's a whole free software part of this in the open source community, which I don't really touch on in this outline, which we could do probably an entire episode on.
I think Adobe used to piss me off because every time I'd install, I think it was one of the more annoying installs, like Adobe Reader, because he used to ask me all kinds of crap. Like, and then I think they eventually got into we're going to package all this crap with it too. That was really frustrating. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I stole Photoshop. Yeah. Treat your customers better.
So I think we should just talk briefly about why this, how this works and what goes into it so people understand what's actually making up the software when they use it. And this applies to everything. This applies to Spotify. This applies to Amazon.com. This applies to pretty much anything that you access today, unless it's an actual thing that you installed locally on your machine. It is going through some degree of SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, whatever you call it. So as part of that evolution, there was an intermediary step where there were data centers that you could go and rent out space, and you can still do this. So plenty of companies still use data centers and host their own hardware and do things. But it is that gradual migration of, well, why am I paying an IT guy and I don't have 40 hours of work a week for him, so what's he going to do all of the time? And so a data center can pay, 5 IT guys to work for 50 customers, and I can just pay them to do all of that. And in theory, that math should math, and it should be less than the hardware, software, and salary costs. And so data centers were starting to say, okay, put your servers here, host things, offer that out to your customers. And the cloud just took that one step further and fully removed your need to even worry about any of that. So I think we're going to do an entire episode on the cloud at some point, but basically, why worry about the hardware? Why worry about all of the IT weirdness and just let somebody else manage all of that for you? Just figure out how to deploy software on top of it.
Yeah, this one could be a whole episode in itself, because it's also, you're a small business owner. Do you really want to be in the business of having a data center? And do you want to worry about your data center blowing up at 2 a.m. or do you want to just have somebody else manage it? So we can get into more details on that too.
Exactly. One of the things that I think people underestimate, especially in the B2B space, is multi-tenancy and the idea that you can offer software to 100 different companies, and it's really, really important that company A doesn't actually accidentally see company B's data and information. And I think it's one of those things where that also applies even to consumer apps, right? You shouldn't go open Spotify and see everyone else's playlists unless, your friends want you to. But it's one of those things that goes into just some of the fundamental plumbing of SaaS systems and needing to be aware of this concept of multi-tenancy and how do you have one server, one cluster, whatever it is, support multiple users, multiple clients, multiple people going in. And there's a ton of infrastructure. Again, we could go into an entire episode just on multi-tenancy, but it is an important part of this SaaS infrastructure is making sure that it is secure and that you can offer this capability to clients securely without intermingling data and worrying about all of the security concerns that go into it. Also, you don't know how successful you're going to be. And so it's very difficult to be able to go and say, well, I need 5 servers because I'm going to need to be able to handle 100,000 users, or I'm going to need 3 million servers to handle Facebook volume of data because you're wildly successful, right? There's a ton of capabilities within SaaS platforms to say, yeah, you have most people tend to listen to their playlists during the day while they're working, and you don't get too many playlist plays at 2 a.m. So why would you need to have 40 servers running at 2 a.m? You scale them up and down. That flexibility, that scaling is going to go into it. The SaaS companies have to figure that out. They have to be able to handle the inconsistency and the variability of when people are going to use this software.
Yeah, and that's super important during seasonal, right? Christmas time, the elasticity
Sure.
in my environment while people are ordering more products, or Thanksgiving, that's another one. So airlines, there's particular times of the year when airlines are expecting to have that elasticity in their services. And that's really difficult. It's really difficult in a data
Right.
center to add that, physically add servers or mutate your environment to spot that new load. So having the cloud have that elasticity is amazing.
Yep. And that especially applies if you're, you sell to Europe and all of France goes on vacation for August. Why are you paying for the CRM software that's going to get used 30% less? Like there's so many different cases where that applies to not only the people offering the software, but the people using the software. So it makes sense that you wouldn't necessarily want to have your own data center, your own cluster of hardware supporting that, because you have to deal with that yourself. Like everyone is impacted by that the flexibility needed.
I'm going to come back to this one in IaaS because it gets into, it's probably into the elasticity, but there's a good use case early in AWS is, I won't say early in, it's probably at the midpoint between now and when they first launched their cloud services. But a good example was one of the universities, you had to book your time on the mainframe. And so the guys who were doing the DNA strand processing, they were going to have to wait 6 months to a year, right, to get 3 hours, 3 days inside of the mainframe because of all the other departments using it. And so they were able to go and do all of their processing over a weekend, right? So they spin up these massive high performance computing labs, do their processing in 3 days and bring it back down again. So they get that spike in cost for 3 days instead of having to wait 6 months to a year to get to the mainframe. So the flexibility, yeah, I'm super biased. I got to be honest, I'm super biased towards cloud, but yeah, that's a great use case, right?
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the good side of software as a service. I will defend this model pretty consistently in a bunch of places because there are good things for both the consumer and the company trying to offer the capability. And then we'll talk about the bad because there's also plenty of bad. So on the good side, it's a reliable revenue stream. So the software company who's trying to offer you that capability has the ability to know, I can support things like bug fixes and upgrade cycles and all of that because I can predict that I'm going to get monthly, annual revenue coming in a way that before subscription-based and software as a solution-based, you didn't have a guarantee that that was going to happen. You had these giant spikes. We're releasing the new version 4.0 comes out, and we're anticipating a bunch of sales. And for the next 2 years, we're going to go sell it to everybody. And then we're not going to have version 5.0 until another 3 years after that. So what do we do? How do we get into new markets? How do we sell those kinds of things? And so your revenue had these spikes and had this sort of inconsistent ability to know it was entirely dependent on you closing new business constantly and renewing people. But renewing people, you had to have something new to renew them to. And so it was this constant challenge versus rather than charge you $500 up front, if I can just break that apart and consistently get $20 a month from you, I can now have that reliable revenue stream coming in. It makes it easier for me to predict hiring. It makes me easier to predict bug fixes and dedicate time to doing things that are not direct revenue drivers. It makes a stable revenue model in a way that a lot of software companies before then didn't have. You look like you were going to say something.
No, because I couldn't remember in that if you covered how they're able to start introducing per user cost.
Oh, yeah, that also is true, right? So you can introduce the fact that, well, and maybe that goes into the next one, which is smaller incremental expenses for customers. So customers now have the option of saying, actually, I don't need to figure out if you're a customer who has to deal with, you used to have to do budget planning and know, oh, crap, it's 1997. The last time we did an Office upgrade was 1994. We really don't think we're going to make it through the year on the old version of Office. We have to anticipate that we're going to pay $500 per user to do a full upgrade of a bunch of people. So suddenly my 1997 budget out of nowhere has a $250,000 software expense. Like, it made customer planning of that stuff really hard as well. And to your point, also, I don't need everybody to pay for everything. So like Office started to do this, right? You had like Office Professional and Office Expert and like all of these different flavors of Office, because these guys over here just needed Outlook and Word, and this group over here needed Access and Publisher. And so being able to have more flexibility and say there's per user cost, and what happens when I know I'm not going to have a bunch of people need to use the software for the first 6 months because we're going to be ramping up our own blah, blah, blah. And so I only need to pay for 5 people. And then after 6 months, we're going to pay for 10 people. And then later it'll be up to 30 people. But like, you had a bunch more flexibility too.
Yeah, it also another positive of that is that they're able to offer you a free tier, right? Like single user.
Right.
So now I can use the reduced features. Obviously, I'm not getting the same as if I was paying
Sure.
enterprise, but being able to use a free tier for a single user, that's amazing if you're a small business and you've got your own marketing agency and you want to keep track of all the different projects you have. So I think people need to understand, like, through those types of payment models, like they do have the free tier.
And there are crappy versions of freemium, right? So freemium is that model where you get the free version and every other screen is an ad trying to convince you to upgrade. Like, there are bad versions of it, but there are good versions of being able to say, yeah, that thing that you want to do, you want to export to a Excel file, free. You want to export over to your Salesforce system, you need to pay us for the next tier of the capability. That's really helpful. That kind of upsell is a thing that salespeople have to do and have to go and have conversations with you, versus in freemium models, you can just have the software try to help you out and do all of that kind of stuff. It just opens the door to a bunch of good things. Do a bunch of jerks abuse it? Yes, but I'm not going to stop doing a thing just because of the jerks, and the people who can take advantage of it effectively do, and it's good. It also gives you the ad-supported option. So Gmail is an option of being able to say, here's a thing that I'm offering to you for free. You can upgrade to the Gmail Professional Suite, but you can also do the ad-supported version. I don't love ad-supported versions of a lot of products, but there is an avenue for that. That does make sense some of the times.
Yeah, I feel like the mobile device version of that is more infuriating than the web version
Sure.
of that. Like, we've all had that cascading moment where it's like a catastrophe. The page hasn't finished rendering, but they've already released the DOM. And so now I can click a link, but the moment I go to click it, it jumps. And so I click another link and then I want to go back,
Yep.
but I'm in a constant click. Like, I get into that with my mobile. And so with the commercials,
Yes.
oh boy, they're infuriating.
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire part of online advertising where they just kind of know that a certain amount of clicks are actually those accidental, the page jumped around and you didn't really mean to click on the ad. You thought you were clicking on something else. Yeah, it gets definitely tricky. One of the other things that people would run into is you would have to wait for those release cycles. And so usually software release cycles were 18, 24-month, 36-month. Like getting new versions of software took years and years. And a lot of the times you would see things like backlogs full of bugs, and they'd be making the trade-off whether or not they thought they could somehow give somebody a little 3 megabyte download to fix that really critical bug, or you needed to wait for the 6-month patch floppy disk or whatever it was. Like getting updates to your software sucked. And it was a whole process. You had to stamp CDs or DVDs. You had to release them in boxes in stores. And so, of course, you weren't going to do that every 4 months. You were going to do that every 2 or 3 years.
It also gives the vendor the flexibility to test features, right? So as a customer, I'm getting something that's being tested with the masses, right? So I love that. I love having that technical capability to try a feature and see, like, how do people accept it? Like, how do they use it? Are they using it the right way? Do we need to change it for the final version? So I love that ability to be able to.
Yeah. And you can do it against 5% of your users. So you don't have to, if you know this feature is risky and we're not sure what the outcome is going to be, you don't have to roll it out to everybody. You can roll it out to a small subset of those people to test it and actually get that kind of feedback really effectively. I think a lot of people I don't think appreciate how terrible it was that you would run into a bug in your software and you were just kind of screwed. That bug lingered for sometimes years because there was no effective upgrade cycle to get you that fix sooner, because it would have to come on a brand new CD or something crazy. And so does all of that require a subscription model? No. But if you want somebody, this goes back to my earlier rant, if you want to have an engineer have the time dedicated to fixing your bugs, it's easier when you have a recurring revenue model to justify them spending the time doing that, because otherwise they need to justify their time. And the way you justify your time in a non-recurring revenue model is by getting new customers and upgrading customers. And so you are incentivized to come up with the new feature, the brand new iteration, the next version, and not fix the bugs. And so it's this weird balancing act of letting the business justify spending time on things that don't sign up new customers. And you do that through revenue models.
And I think this got to the point of crazy where some companies were actually documenting their workarounds, which is unforgivable.
Right.
It's like,
yes.
Hey, this doesn't work, but here's a workaround. And they felt good. They felt good about that.
The official supported documentation was like, yeah, we know this is a problem, so do these 8 steps instead.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also good for customers because you can avoid the sunk cost fallacy. So a lot of the times you would get locked into software because you had the IT person who knew that software. You had the servers that you'd already purchased that were dedicated to that software. You'd done the installs on people's desks. All of your files locally were in that vendor's file format. Like the sunk cost fallacy really locked you into vendors. Vendor lock-in is a real thing now. Vendors wish that they can achieve it as frequently as they can. But it's even worse when you don't have an ability to just, oh, okay, my browser is now going to go to a new URL and I'm going to start using the new software. It's not often as easy as that. You probably have a bunch of data locked into that vendor, and maybe it's in some cases a little bit worse because it's not on your local network. But in a lot of ways, your flexibility of saying, okay, I'm going to go do an evaluation of a new vendor and we're just going to migrate. And that's a thing that was a lot harder when you weren't in a SaaS model. So there's some benefits for the customer there as well. And then I did the math. I went and pulled a bunch of information, stuck it in a spreadsheet, and did some estimation, because I was really annoyed when people would say, it's more expensive. I have to, pay a monthly rent to these corporations to use the software that I used to own. And actually, no, most of the time it is cheaper. So I went and looked at 2 examples, Microsoft Office and Adobe Photoshop. Office, between 1996 and 2013, if you had paid for every upgrade, which no one did, I appreciate, but if you had paid for every upgrade, adjusted for inflation, you'd have paid $3,755 per user. If you'd done every other upgrade, which a lot of people did, right? A lot of people did Office 97, but not Office 98. And then they did Office 2000, but not Office 2002, right? Like a lot of people were on that every other cycle. Those companies would have paid $2,111 per user. If the subscription had been in place, the current Microsoft Office subscription had been in place for those 17 years, the consumer, who was usually probably paying for Office Standard, maybe sometimes Office Professional, would have paid $1,800 over those 17 years. So depending on when you had upgraded, you'd be saving anywhere from $350 to $2,000 by doing the subscription instead of the software license cost. Businesses would pay $2,600. So if you'd always upgraded, that would save you about $1,100. It will cost you more. So the company who had skipped every other version technically would pay about $500 more per user. So it doesn't work out for the companies who were doing the skip version, but you are also getting all of the new features every time the upgrade comes out. So $500, yeah, there's a little bit of a question. But the home user, the most vocal person complaining about this on Twitter right now was the dude who wanted to have Microsoft Word 97 and never pay for it again. Shut up. You would have saved money from the consumer versions. Let's look at Photoshop. Photoshop between 1998 and 2013. If you'd done every upgrade, adjusted for inflation, you would have paid $4,000. If you'd done every other upgrade between 1998 and 2013, you'd have paid $2,100. The subscription for 15 years would definitely cost you more if you had done the skip. You'd pay $1,800 more. You'd saved about $100. So Adobe basically is earning the same amount of money. There's not a huge benefit for you there, but it's not costing you more. It is definitely costing you the same.
Cost me zero.
Yeah, well, exactly. That is the thing, right? A lot of the people who complain, I question whether they paid in Photoshop 5 cost $609 brand new. So if you'd done the right thing and you'd bought Photoshop brand new, $609. Now, are you going to try to argue that Adobe's a billion-dollar company and one person, getting the free version doesn't hurt them? Sure, but that's the stupid logic of people who say my vote doesn't count. It absolutely matters. You have to pay for the software you use. The people who make the software deserve to get paid.
I'm sorry, it's called enterprise. If you don't protect your software and people can get it for free, that's called enterprise.
No,
that's enterprise. Yes, that's
called
enterprise.
That's called they sent people to jail. That's called if you downloaded music illegally on Napster, you had to pay. You're probably still paying garnished salary, and you probably went to jail. Like that's not how capitalism works.
AI is stealing data right now, and
AI
and that's
is a
okay.
thief. Yes, no, it's not.
That's enterprise, right? I mean, we
It
were doing the
is
same
funny
thing.
how the companies. It's funny how the companies who complain that everyone stole their software and should do it now are stealing other people's work. But hypocrisy is worthless. Nobody has shame anymore. There's no point in pointing out somebody's hypocrisy other than to feel morally superior.
That's why I can, with revisionist history, I can go back and say to all of my other enterprising individuals out there, good on you, because we knew they were screwing us, and we knew they were going to screw us even more, and so we had enterprise.
Yeah. Anyways, I am in no way defending the monopolies of Microsoft or Adobe. I think both are probably fairly terrible companies. My only point is the two 800-pound gorillas that everyone loves to quote, Office and Photoshop, roughly end up coming out about even and drastically ahead in the case of Office for consumers. And as a business model for small to mid-sized companies, why would you not take advantage of all of the benefits and still charge people the same? So the other thing is I found a random quote from a random person on Quora who I just wanted to shit on. There's no reason to actually include this in the article, but his quote was, in the late 90s, I bought a copy of Photoshop for something like $50. I could put it on as many machines as I wanted. I could use it as long as I wanted. I drug that copy of Photoshop around for as long as it would work on the current OS. Now Photoshop costs $33.99 a month for a business license for the cheapest version. One, no, you didn't. You never once paid $50 for Photoshop. And two, the business license does not cost $33.99. It costs $19.99.
I have to applaud you on your use of the word drug.
That wasn't mine. That was Jason Turner's usage of the word drug.
But yeah, I drugged that copy of Photoshop. Took me a long time.
No, yeah, like he means physically dragged it from machine to machine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will defend SaaS as a concept, especially for small and mid-sized businesses. It makes a ton of sense for them to offer things to you in a way that delivers them reliable revenue to help them grow. If you like the software that they make for you, you should want them to stick around. You should want them to continue to offer it to you and offer upgrades and improvements to it. So as much as I will defend SaaS for a bunch of good reasons, there are a ton of problems with it and it can get abused. And so we should absolutely there are both sides to this one. One of the rare times I will say both sides matter. I don't think people appreciated how valuable their time was. And so things that are ad supported can be incredibly lucrative. And the amount of money that you are worth to advertisers is actually far more than the whatever free version of Spotify that you pay for, or the free version of Spotify that you listen to, or the version of Spotify you pay for. A bunch of these things, the math doesn't math. Your attention paid for. In the late 90s, the 6 friends each made $1 million per episode, and there were 22 plus episodes a season. Advertising alone, just for 6 people, paid for $120 million in a single year, plus however many millions of dollars for the writers and the staff and everybody else that went into making those shows. Advertising was incredibly lucrative, and I don't think it can't make up for the $11.99 you paid Netflix, right? And so a bunch of these subscription models have somehow masked and obscured from you the actual value that was happening through advertising. And so you were never going to pay enough for Netflix to be profitable. Netflix was always going to have to introduce an ad version. Netflix is always going to have to raise its prices. You are never going to pay the artists and the writers and the actors enough to be on Netflix. It doesn't work because ads, your time is the thing that was actually being paid for, and your time was worth much more than you realized.
Yeah, I feel like when I first started using Prime, there weren't advertisements in the movies I was watching. And now
Right.
all of a sudden it's like, go ad free. I'm like, wait a minute, that used to be part of my subscription cost. And you just, it's like I don't know how anybody can not call it enterprising that we were screwing them before they started screwing us, because it's like the airlines, everything's an ancillary now. Like, remember when you used to get fed on a plane and now you have to pay extra? And it's like, oh my God, you have to buy their headphones. It's like, come on, you tight bastards. You can keep that in.
Yeah.
You should keep that in because, oh my God, they're terrible
No,
people.
no, it really is. It's like, it impacts everyone. It impacts you as the consumer because you're getting a lower quality product, and it impacts the people who make the product because you're not paying the flight attendant, the pilot, the actor, the writer, the musician. So many people don't get paid because when Silicon Valley comes in and takes over an industry, they're willing to burn $1 billion because they know they're going to make 100 billion off of you over the next 2 decades. And so when Netflix was losing money, Netflix was not profitable because they were willing to lose money to do these kinds of things to get you hooked. And now that you're hooked on Netflix, you have to pay. Spotify is the same way. Musicians do not make the money that they should when you stream on Spotify.
I want you to remember this moment, because when I talk about evolving conscientiously and how I don't think we ever will, this is one of those moments that I'll use as an example. We collectively could change everything if we just banded together and said, fuck you, we're not flying. Not until you bring down the prices, stop charging us for ancillaries that we used to get for free. But we can't ever do that. We can't ever come together and actually just say, you know what, we're all not going to go to work tomorrow to cost the economy and the companies to make them pay. We can never do that, right? We can never band together and do that.
You can't say never. You can't say never, because just in the past couple of weeks, 2 examples of Delta was found to be charging solo travelers more per ticket than pairs of travelers, and the news broke, and Delta had to publicly retract that feature of their website and go back to charging equal costs for tickets for everybody because a news report came out and exposed them for doing that kind of thing. So it's not never.
No. That's different. No, that's different. That's not people.
No. I'm not saying it's equivalent. I'm just saying there are still instances where you can have that impact by doing things like reporting. You can have the impact by shopping with your like your wallet makes choices. Target decided to cave to Trump and roll back all of its DEI initiatives and then didn't realize the people who shop at Target are millennial liberals and Target's revenue is in the tank because no one wants to shop at Target anymore. So people still can take collective action. I wish it was more. I wish it was more frequent. I wish it was on bigger, broader topics. But the fact that we still do it sometimes makes me think you're possibly wrong. I'm frustrated that you are right most of the time. One of the other bad things about the SaaS world is companies now have a shorter window to worry about subscription churn. When upgrade cycles happened years apart, you had some time, right? You had time to go and talk to them, understand how they were using the functionality, understand what they wanted in the next upgrade. You had that 18, 24, 36-month window to figure out what you should do in the next upgrade cycle. And now basically what used to be the account manager has turned into the customer success team because they're constantly monitoring what customers are doing, because when you pay a monthly subscription and you can just simply jump ship to another vendor at any given moment, that's harder for the company. That's harder for the company to keep on top of. You have to be hyper responsive to customers, and being hyper responsive to customers can often lead to really bad product and feature designs.
And it's important for our listeners to notice sometimes when you're picking up a subscription, they'll give you the monthly cost and the annual cost. And picking the annual cost, you'll get a discount, but they want to lock you in for the year.
Yeah, exactly. To avoid exactly that. Well, and there's a good version of that, which is competition is good. So being held to ability to adapt quickly and respond to those churn situations and deal with that quickly is good writ large for everybody, but specifically being the company who has to worry about the new competitor who shows up, does the 5 things you don't, but doesn't do any of the 30 things you do, is really hard. It does make it a harder industry sometimes to compete against others who look flashy and new, but don't necessarily, it gets really tricky sometimes. I will say, having all of the infrastructure be out of companies' control does mean that data security becomes even harder. And when you had a data center or on-prem data hosted by the company, yes, you were at risk of the person who left their security badge at the coffee shop and you got, right? Like there was problems with having individual companies be responsible for your data. But now in theory, if you do figure out how to get into a backdoor at a data center or a SaaS company, you have access to a crap ton of data. It makes data security harder.
I think part of the challenge there, my pushback would be the cloud has introduced features that data centers and companies didn't have, right? So
Sure,
because
absolutely.
like the data center wasn't really concerned with, hey, we got a file system, we got a file server, and it's got all the company files on, and I'm just going to willy-nilly give everybody access. People printing things up and taking files from the data center, leaving their laptops, like you pointed out, leaving your badge somewhere. So I feel like the cloud has done a good job of closing a lot of those security concerns.
I'd go in the other direction and say, if you hacked Salesforce, you only impacted the 3,200 customers Salesforce had. If you hacked Mongo Atlas, you've now hacked the 10,000 customers that Mongo Atlas had. If you hack Google Cloud, you now hack, right? Like there is now this stack. The tech stack is no longer that one company is responsible for the full stack. And so if you can breach the one company, you're limited. Now you breach any one of the pieces of the stack, everyone who's built on top of that layer is impacted.
Just to be clear, it's very rare for them to get hacked unless it's through the customer doing stupid things.
Sure, but that's that customer doing a stupid thing, screwing me as a different customer. I don't deserve to get punished because my fellow customer did something stupid. So that's not an excuse.
If I leave the data center door open, anybody can walk in, right?
The data center was already the first step down this path. Absolutely. This one is less of an issue, but there are still plenty of places. But you are dependent on the internet, right? You are dependent on infrastructure that is not public. You are dependent on paying for your internet access. And depending on where you are, your internet access may not be good. So Anybody who's done a road trip trying to play their Spotify playlist, you get into the middle of Nevada where there is no cell coverage. You better have hoped you downloaded the offline version of that playlist because you're not going to get access to it. And the company offering the service to you is dependent on the internet access being good to them. Where we work just had a incident a couple of weeks ago where some crew doing construction cut the fiber cable going to one of our data centers for like 4 hours while they panicked to do that. We were offline at part of the data center. So like there are those random situations as well. All I'm saying is you are stacking the layers of dependency, and any one of those layers is now a vector for a problem to occur.
And
Which
that's
is maybe the risk you're taking.
yeah, and it's interesting too, like some of the features that you'll notice, like there's a lot of SaaS providers that will give you offline content. You can do processing offline. So that it's not the sole reason why that exists today, but that is an interesting point that I can work on offline versions. I think obviously Google is one that provides a lot of offline services, and that does allow me to work without the internet connection, but it's not as prevalent as it should be.
And the person who was working on the PowerPoint slide for the big client presentation didn't have to used to worry about the internet going down or something weird happening, and all of a sudden their Google Slides access is gone. And yeah, that's why Google had to come up with offline mode and a bunch of those kinds of things, but not everyone has that. So yeah, it gets weird. I think one of the things, kind of to one of your points earlier, I don't know if it'll make it into the cut, but the everything being a subscription does mean that there are things where it now is harder to cancel that subscription. There's plenty of dubious practices out there from companies who make it so you have to call somebody in a call center 4,000 miles away from you to cancel and terminate the trial period or whatever it is. It really does open up the door to some pretty bad abuses of credit card information and locking people into situations that become difficult to extract yourself out of. There have been attempts by things like the Consumer Protection Bureau, Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, that was set up as part of Dodd-Frank that Trump and Elon just totally tore apart. But they were trying to do things like, if you offer an online subscription, you must offer an online cancellation option. Elon Musk rolled that back, so good job, yay, consumers for Republicans. But yeah, there's really good chances to abuse that.
Yeah, and actually that's what I was referencing earlier with the co-working space in Fort Lauderdale downtown, is they've hidden away the how you actually cancel it. And there was nowhere, even when I went to my profile page and looked at the billing, there was nowhere that said cancel subscription. So actually I might do more research and find out if they're actually not playing by the rules.
Yeah, no, you absolutely should. But it's ridiculous that you have to do that research. Right?
What's interesting,
that is one of the downsides of this.
Yeah. What I found interesting too is early in when trials first came out, you very rarely had to put your credit card number in, as I remember it. But they got smart. They know how many people forget that 14-day trial is about to end, and that first bill goes through. They make money whether you use it or not. And remember, that's sticky, right? Because now I paid $40. I feel compelled to use it. I put my data in there and it suddenly becomes a little bit harder to leave, right?
Well, it also is AOL was still making billions of dollars because people in 1998 got the CDs, signed up, used AOL for 2 years, and then they moved somewhere that had DSL or whatever else, but they didn't cancel the AOL subscription. So that household had not dialed into an AOL modem connection in 5 years, but was still paying whatever the AOL monthly subscription fee was, right? Like there's an entire business model out there, which is people forget to turn it off.
And these corporations hate the loopholes and the enterprising nature of the consumer, where I felt smart to have 8 Gmail accounts, one for my junk mail. Let's not talk about why I have 8. But I can get a subscription into one of those accounts and not realize. So I actually just went through all my subscriptions and canceled a ton. But now I got to go through all of those profiles to figure out, why is CBS charging me? So then they'll start to love it again because they're making money and they're not using any processing at all.
Yep. Another thing that I don't know what to do about is the SaaS model has fully broken people's brains. We touched on this earlier where no one actually owned their software. They just didn't realize that the end user license agreement they were agreeing to from the CD install wasn't actually owning the software, it was owning a license to usage of the software. But there are just a ton of examples. I pulled out some ones. I'll link them in the blog post. Sam Vietin wrote a Medium article. Everything is a subscription, and I'm so tired of it. Pulled out of a couple of quotes here because I think it's just really interesting that this is the way just a lot of people perceive things, and they are wrong. This is conventional wisdom that has sunk in but is not correct. So he says, moreover, while subscriptions may seem affordable initially, they can add up significantly over time. The cumulative cost can exceed what one might have paid for a traditional one-time purchase, making it more expensive in the long run. And that's just simply not true. I did the math, right? Like there are cases where that's true, but that's not a universally true thing. And this is this thing where just the default reaction is, well, a subscription will cost me more. And it's like, no, actually, the reason you were paying $400 for that piece of software is really hard and took a lot of people a lot of time to write that code for you. And you owe them money. That's how capitalism works. We can all wish we weren't living in capitalism, but we do. So you need to pay people for their time. And the subscription model sometimes is more expensive, but not always. This is not a universally true statement.
Yeah, and when I buy a piece of software, if it costs me $400, right? There's no return, but at least I can cancel my subscription. I may not like how long I have to wait to cancel it, but I can get out at $100 and say, this just wasn't worth it, right? So, yeah, I think this one, yeah, I don't like that one.
He goes on to say, I just want to open the app and start working, but I'm interrupted by 3 to 4 pop-ups prompting new functions that I don't need. Furthermore, I've encountered situations where a familiar menu or feature that I've been using for years suddenly disappears after an update. And yes, there are definitely times one of the downsides of a SaaS solution is the new UI gets forced on you and you have to relearn things. There's absolutely better ways of doing that. Software companies can absolutely suck at that. But also, when a new feature shows up and you get that little prompt that says, like, highlights the new button and you click next 3 times to get taken on a little tour, that is not disrupting your work. You always have a little X icon, like, calm down, Sam. This is not a real thing. He also says there's a good reason why professionals typically do not rent their tools. They want to use them for as long as they remain functional and only replace them when necessary. Which, yes, that is totally valid. If you have a power saw, yeah, you're not renting the power saw, but also a lot of people do. Like, taxi drivers often rent the cars that they're driving around. Like, this is not again, these are not universal truths that this guy has found. They are sometimes true.
They also open up a market to consumers that wouldn't be open, right? Like, I can go get a carpet. I can wash my own carpet.
Carpet cleaners are the exact, yeah.
Yeah, I can rent a carpet cleaner from Home Depot, save myself a ton of money and do it myself. Like, so it's actually opened up a whole realm of possibilities for consumers that wasn't there before.
Right. Well, and also it's entirely dependent on the context. Yes, I'm sure that the power saw should come with a warranty in case it breaks, but it's not a thing that's worried about new and innovative things constantly coming up. And, the evolution of the wood cutting market is probably not that significant. So I'm not sure that this is a comparison that makes a ton of sense, but it's one of those, like, logical fallacies that people keep coming up with of, like, I don't have to rent my hammer. Yeah, there hasn't been an innovation in hammers in 3,000 years. I'm not worried about that.
Oh, except the one that has the corner. Isn't the one that has a corner in it? It's got a joint in it.
What?
Yeah,
I don't know. I've never seen that.
It's for when you want to hammer.
There's been one hammer innovation.
There's been a few others, because I'm pretty sure when they first created hammers, there wasn't the nail remover on them either.
His next complaint is that he's comparing something that lists a price as $4 versus €4, and he lives in the Eurozone. So the bill is not the same. It's more like paying $7 when paying in euros. And that's simply not how it works. I know it's not how it works, so I looked at the screenshot that he was comparing to, and it was from Adobe in Germany showing the price. And what's $19.99 in the US at the time was only $11.89 in euros. Like, just simple things of, like, he took a screenshot to think he was proving a point, but he wasn't, which is where some of this just gets into. People have these preconceived notions, and then they find the evidence that they think supports their preconceived notions. And it's like, no, like, you're just wrong about this. That's not how pricing works. So then his next quote is, "The only option left for me is to support companies like Affinity that maintain their pricing without implementing a subscription model. Therefore, I purchase every new version of their apps." Let's go back earlier in his article in which he says, "In the past, I didn't feel compelled to purchase every new version of the Adobe suite because the added features were often unnecessary for my work. I could wait for several years before deciding to invest in a new version, mainly because the cost was also so significant." So what he's saying is he likes that this company doesn't force him to pay a subscription. And so what he's willing to do to reward them for the lack of the subscription is to pay for every upgrade that they offer to him, which is the whole point of the monthly subscription model. He's cutting off his nose to spite his face. It is this, and again, my point is not to pick on this one guy, though I'm picking on this one guy a little bit because this is the kind of annoying logical fallacy nonsense that I see on the internet and it drives me nuts. But because it is this conventional wisdom that is just locked into people's brains, and it's not true. I want you to be based on truth and evidence. Yeah, so the final quote from this guy is, "Customers are not a resource to be constantly milked. Unfortunately, this sentiment applies to nearly every tech company nowadays. And yes, there are absolutely abusive, horrible parts of subscription services which are treating consumers as a cash cow, and it does get bad. But the number of dead software companies who created a truly good and interesting piece of software that was incredibly niche is nearly unlimited. There are so many things out there that comes along that were good small ideas, and then because they couldn't create a revenue model that actually supported them investing in bug fixes, the operating system upgrade that broke their piece of software and they didn't have the resources to create the new version that worked that way. What you're really mad at in this situation is that your wages have been suppressed for decades and you can't afford to contribute to the economy the way that makes sense to support the software that you want, and you're misplacing your anger on these companies who a lot of the times are just trying to support themselves and make money doing it. And yes, you can point to Adobe and Microsoft and a bunch of people being abusive, but really what's going on is you're not making the same money that you were making adjusted for inflation 20 years ago, and you're mad about it. And you should be mad about it, but yelling at the company who wants to offer a subscription model is not the answer. The answer is forcing capitalism to pay you correctly. All right, another one. I'm just going on a rant about a couple of people because I genuinely think part of this is just a perception problem. So Nick Hilton has an article, "The End of the Subscription Era is Coming," and it starts off with the very ironic statement, "This piece exists thanks to the munificence of my paying newsletter subscribers." So you're about to complain about subscription era and then thank the people who are subscribing to you. Cool. Good job. He talks about OnlyFans and Substack, OnlyFans being the basically porn site, Substack being the newsletter blog subscription platform, and how people's wallets are getting crunched by inflation and this economy, and how it will have to change. And then he basically goes on to reinvent the newspaper. He talks that they should be bundling content creators together to offer better value to consumers. And it's like, yeah, everything that people come up with is just reinventing what we already used to do. And newspapers, through a combination of subscriptions and advertising, paid for really good independent journalism. And people stopped wanting to do that for various reasons. So I love that Silicon Valley reinvents the bus every couple of years, reinvents the newspaper every couple of years, the things that they are helping kill off. Yeah, why don't we just do what we know has worked? Anyways, I do think there's some really bad parts of subscription as a service that we should talk about. So on the software development side, that reliable revenue stream can actually disincentivize the larger innovation. If you had to figure out how in 2 years you were going to convince people to pay you $400 to do the next upgrade cycle, you really had to make sure that that next version was truly offering something worthy of the cost. And there is now a downward incentive in a lot of companies to not rock the boat, to just incrementally do tiny little things because you need to keep people coming back. And it's this weird balancing act of when a new competitor comes up and is doing something truly innovative, you can get screwed because you weren't keeping up. But also you sometimes have the pressure to just be like, yeah, but we've already got them on the hook. So just keep doing what we do well. And that's the death of innovation.
Yeah. And they also, our listeners need to understand is that's not just the consumers, right? Because there are small businesses that are paying subscription costs so they can provide services to consumers. And they're the
Sure.
ones who are struggling with it, saying, I'm charging my customers $40 a month, but the numbers don't work when my subscription costs are this much, right? And so then they have to go back to their consumers. They lose customers because now the customer's like, oh, I'm not going to pay that new subscription cost. And it's like, I'm just passing down the pain to you guys, right? And nobody can actually say that. But yeah, there are issues for small businesses subscriptions too.
Yep. And then weirdly, in the other direction, there are situations where the reliable revenue stream means that people overreact and think that they constantly have to change in order to justify the $20 a month or whatever it is. And so all of a sudden, there's a lot of times when you'll see a new feature roll out that changes the workflow because somebody somewhere was like, well, we got to feel like we're doing something new with this. And so you end up getting a whole new thing, a new piece of functionality that you didn't even need because they thought they needed to justify it, or because they thought they needed to get into a new slice of, a new vertical, a new part of the market, or a new industry, and it changes the software that you were reliably using for your industry, for your type of capability. So it just causes some weird incentives for companies to offer functionality in both directions. I will say subscription fatigue is also something that's real. I think it kind of goes to the last conversation about there's weird bad perceptions that aren't really based in data or evidence, but the feeling is out there. And so there are situations like Office is now offering a one-time license again because people wanted to pay a higher rate than a monthly subscription. So it's this weird back and forth.
There's also a response to the enterprising nature of consumers, right? So Netflix, you share it's fairly common for people to share their accounts, right? So you log into a friend's, you log into your own Netflix up in Massachusetts, let somebody watch it, and now Netflix have figured it out, and they're saying, hey, there's a new subscription model for that.
I think one of the worst parts of the SaaS model is other industries have decided that that's a model that they should follow. And so in the early 2000s, DRM, digital rights management, was a thing that started to happen, slightly in a response to Napster, but also just in a response to the sort of overall ability for people to get access to this and to say, yes, you have downloaded this MP3 file, but you don't really own this MP3 file. There's a DRM signature on it, which means you need to check in with Apple to see if you actually still are paying Apple for the thing and that you should be able to own it. So DRM was one of the first things. I don't know that it exists too often anymore these days because the subscription model means you rarely get access to individual files. That was sort of the first attempt. Music is effectively dead. You still have some huge, massive artists like Taylor Swift and Beyonce who can sell albums and make money off of music, but Spotify has effectively killed the music industry. The royalties you get out of Spotify are nothing. You are ripping off musicians if you stream their music. It is not a viable business model to help artists make money.
So I just started using Spotify after years and years, but actually I still do my old tactic, which is there are so many open web servers on the internet that have files, hundreds, thousands of MP3s. And actually in Google, it's pretty simple. You just use the right arguments and it will go search for file types of MP3, right? And so I do take pleasure when I find an open web server and get to download someone's junk box.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's the likelihood that you're finding a Chappell Roan song that's an MP3 file? Like, do you find music after 2008?
I don't know
when you do that.
I don't even know who Chaperone is, but it sounds like I don't even want that music.
That sounds right. I do think it is ironic that, once again, Microsoft was ahead of the curve. Microsoft and the Zune had a subscription-based music service, and everyone hated it. Everyone complained, I don't want to rent my music, I want to own my music. And then Apple came out with Apple Music and started offering you the ability to rent your music. And then Spotify came along, and Pandora had that ability to listen to a radio and do a bunch of stuff. So it is one of those situations where the internet from 1995 to 2005 was a wildly different place, and everyone has just gotten on board that you should rent everything, and it's actually pretty bad for a bunch of these industries. Same thing is happening to video games. Sony has decided in a couple of cases to just yank a video game off of your PlayStation 5 because the licensing agreement wasn't there anymore. And they don't care that you paid them, $65 for that game, it's no longer yours. And that's bad. You paid them $65. You had an expectation that you owned that thing, that you were paying a sizable chunk of money. It would be one thing if you were paying for the Xbox, whatever that pass is called, the Game Pass. You're paying Microsoft $10 a month. Your expectation is, yeah, I stopped paying the $10 a month. That thing can go away. But the money doesn't make sense. And again, it's because it's broken. It's all broken. I would not pay you $65 if I knew you could take it away from me. It's goofy.
That's disgusting. I didn't know that was happening because I'm a gamer, right? So if somebody,
Yeah.
it's actually, it feels like burglary, right? Isn't that trespassing?
That's the thing, is they're just, Amazon has done this. So the next one, books, Amazon and the Kindle. Amazon has just decided, yeah, you don't actually own this book that you paid. Now, the problem is you didn't really pay the same amount of money. Usually a Kindle book is like $16, where the hardcover is $22. But I would have assumed that the $22 covered the shipping and the printing. But no, it turns out Amazon can just decide you don't own that book anymore and take it back out of your Kindle library.
I know if there's any PlayStation gamers who've gone through all the versions too, why is it that as soon as Sony talk about their new console, all the old consoles start getting in the ring of death? Like, it's
I mean, we
very
probably should do
suspect.
an episode on planned obsolescence is an actual
Yeah.
legitimate thing that was crippling capitalism. Yes, there's probably an episode we could do on planned obsolescence. Netflix and the overall TV and movie streaming industry has killed DVDs. And if anyone hasn't, I'll link it in the show notes. Matt Damon's explanation for the logic of how movies used to get financed. There was entire budget decisions made on the fact that you could know that half of your revenue was going to come from the DVD sales afterwards. And so you could basically pay for the marketing while it was in theaters off of the fact that you knew there was likely going to be DVD money coming in, and the money didn't have to make sense some of the times. The balancing happened 9 months later when all of the DVD revenue came in, and that's not how it works anymore. And there's just so many parts of Prime Video and Apple TV Plus and Netflix and all of these things that are fully killing the way TV and movie financing works. And it's bad. It's bad for art. It's bad for our ability to get mid-budget movies. You have to spend $180 million to try to make $1 billion in movie tickets. It's all broken.
Yeah. So this is where I like Enterprise again. When I went home to see my family a few years ago, they were like, "What do you want to watch?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "We got it all." That's Enterprise, right? It really is, right? Because they might not have been screwing us as bad back then, but they are now, right? And
Yes,
we
absolutely.
always knew
It
they would.
Yes, and at least when they were screwing the consumer, the people making the thing, like, you could become a movie star, and should you have made $10 million for a movie, if you were bringing in $200 million because your name was on it, in a capitalist system, you probably should get a pretty good chunk of money. But now a bunch of situations with writers and directors and creative people and musicians and just so many people who produce the content that you consume. It's horrible that I just said the word content. Like, they don't get compensated. The people who get compensated are the 4 billionaires who own the 4 holding companies that own all of this stuff. All right. Anything else you want to talk about on SaaS model?
No, it feels like just such a like obviously the SaaS, but we're going to do episodes on PaaS and IaaS.
No, I mean, I was mostly just responding to the fact that there's a constant drumbeat online of,
Yeah.
it's so annoying that I have to pay for things.
Subscriptions,
Why
yeah.
is everything a subscription today?
Yeah.
And it's like, because, I don't know, 3 out of 5 times, 4 out of 5 times, it's good, actually. It sucks terribly the 1 out of 5 times when monopolies abuse it, but there's a lot of benefit. If you're trying to build your own company, the fact that you can now do that as a SaaS model is fucking great.